right, welcome back, everybody. So I have Russell Kraujalis on today, and this guy, if you haven't seen him on Instagram, you need to go check out his Instagram. He does a lot of work with ICA products and Envirolac and some other water-based products, and he's really taken a deep dive into air-assisted airless, which seems to be one of the most problematic units for water-based coatings. And so I'm glad to have you on to talk about this because you have a lot of insights on this. And so I'm excited for the viewers and stuff to hear what you have to say. So thanks for coming on, man.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate your channel and all the information you have put out there. Super helpful. Boy, don't know where I would be if I didn't have that insight. Tell you what, still be doing things the hard way.
Yeah, well, we're always learning. And why don't you tell everybody a little bit, just like a short background on how you got into water-based coatings, and then we've kind of talked on the phone a little bit, just a little bit about your experience with air-assisted airless, and it was very similar to mine. I was like, all right, air-assisted airless, this is going to be awesome. And then I was like, yeah, this is not so cool.
Yeah. So I started working for a good painting contractor years ago. I had no background in that at all, other than I used to restore guns. And so I had some conventional spray experience for refinishing the guns. And I went from that to working with him, and he did a lot of solvent, very little water-based fine finishing, if you will. It was all lacquer, pigmented lacquer, whatnot. And he used, believe it or not, I think he had no tip other than a 517. So when we would spray out interior trim with Precat lacquer clear, it was just very difficult.
It's like a fire hose.
But it was really just a case of not knowing what you didn't know. But eventually, when I went out on my own, I started off with a couple of airless pumps. When I started to get more into the fine finishing aspect of things, I went to a Cap Spray 115 turbine. Mm-hmm. Got remote pots, spent big bucks at the time on it. And it spent, I think, 2 years trying to figure that out. Seemed like constantly messing around with it. And then from there, I went to the air-assisted airless because I was going to, I was basically told if I buy it, I'm going to go to heaven and all this. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of funny, actually. I bought it and hid it from my wife. And I had it for about 2 months in my shop, which was in my basement, which if you really want to, bring happiness to your wife, have a basement paint shop. But I had it hidden in a sense under a drop pushed into the corner. And one day our lab went down there and blew beef all over it. And of course, my wife was down there doing laundry and saw that he had thrown up in the corner. And when she went to clean it up, there she found the new sprayer covered in sick. And in the meantime, I had it for about 2 months, and I could not get that thing to do what I expected it to do. And then on top of it, that happened, and there was a intense conversation about that purchase. So my experience with air-assisted airless was initially got off to kind of a rocky start, to say the least. But and then eventually, I should say, when I bought it, my intent was to be able to use it inside someone's home with water-based coatings, because I knew what it was like spraying the lacquer. People had to move out. Mm-hmm. They could not be in there. And so my business model was, hey, I can come in and do this work. I can refinish your kitchen, and you can live in the home. And I can get you a very fine finish. That was the thought behind it. But it took probably several years of monkeying around. I didn't use it every day, mind you, but to try and figure out really what were some fundamentals that made it work and work well, in my opinion. And that's where basically, like you and I have talked, I had to throw out everything that I had heard from the people that were selling the product, the machines, or representing the brand. They had been so, in my opinion, marinated in solvent coatings and so deeply influenced by that they really were not able to offer advice for air-assisted, airless, and water-based coatings. And I had to basically just say, okay, I'm going to do everything backwards and start from there. I'll do what I'm not supposed to do that's wrong and see if that makes a difference. Because I couldn't stomach spending all this money on the machine and not getting it to work when it made sense that it should work. You're combining the two forms of atomization, and that I just couldn't logically think that this was just a total marketing thing. It had to work, and how to make it. So that was kind of that was the genesis of behind getting into it and trying to understand how to get a good finish.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about this, because anyone that's used an air-assisted airless with Waterbase has struggled with it. And there's it seems to be two schools of thought. There's one school of thought that you run like 400 to 600 fluid pounds, and then you have to crank your air all the way up. That's generally the solvent approach, and that still seems to be the stigma throughout the industry. And then here comes a bunch of us in here, and we're going, this doesn't really work. And so we kind of go the other direction. So there's a bunch of us out there that say no, higher fluid pressures and smaller tips versus the other way around. So I want you to kind of explain how you came to these conclusions, and kind of how you go about doing some testing to figure out what works tip wise for you.
Yeah, you're right. The gospel has always been for water-based, at least, and I'm assuming that's what other people have heard, because you just voiced it as well, is you want to apply the material at as low speed as possible, as would that be like a foot per second, as slowly as possible to the substrate. And when you do that, it allows the water-based coating to relax and level better. So the lower pressure that you can apply it, the better. And I think that's true to a certain extent. Some coatings maybe more so than others. You can make the argument that it works somewhat so. I think that argument really only works in a horizontal application situation. It does not work, in my experience, vertically at all. What got me actually to figure out what would work in that regard is when I had spent 2 years messing around with the HVLP equipment. I was told the same thing as air-assisted airless. Oh, you need to use a number 5 tip if it's if you want to spray, Benjamin Moore Aura exterior. You need to use a number 5 tip, otherwise it won't flow out, it won't work. Well, I tried that, and I heat the product up and try it and reduce it. It's terrible. It didn't work, no matter what I would do. So then at one point, I went down the route of reading what automotive guys said, and they started talking about, well, we hardly use anything above a 1.3.
Right.
So I found the closest equivalent to that in the Titan, which was a number 2 needle and air cap set. And I had really dialed in using Aura with that. I could reduce it to a specific, I think it was like a 28-second drip was perfect. I'd heat it up, put the remote pot in 100-degree water, and man, beautiful. Couldn't beat it. Same with Advance. Worked great. Well, when I got tired of messing around with that Titan, because I had limitations for what I was doing, and went to the air-assisted airless, for some reason I didn't think about that correlation. The best spray quality I got was using as small a needle as possible. And one day when I was messing with the dumb thing, I thought, well, it says HVLP on it. I'm going to use as small a tip as possible. And it took like 3 weeks to get it from Sherwin-Williams, but I got an 09 for my G40 and a flat tip. And that gave a pretty good finish. Like, okay, I took old cans of acetone because they're super smooth. Took the cover off of them, and I'd spray them vertically to see, if I could get this really ideal off the gun finish. And that worked pretty good. It wasn't bad. Better than I could achieve with the airless on a vertical surface. And that's what really got me sort of thinking, okay, if an 09 works well, what about smaller? And then on top of it, is there any correlation with fluid pressure? And so through about a year of messing around off and on, I got to the point where I realized, okay, if I run this at high pressure and these small tips and use as a minimum of air as I can get away with, that really works. And I can't duplicate on a vertical surface that quality with an airless.
Right. Yeah. Well, and the problem with the airless is that with an 08 tip, you're going to put 4 or 5 wet mills on no matter how you slice it. Yeah. You can't put a thin coat on. It's coming out like a fire hose. And some of these coatings, and I want to kind of touch on this, because that seems to be the Achilles heel of Waterbase is vertical application, in my opinion. And some products do better than others. And I want you to talk a little bit about so that people understand what you're saying. So one of the things you do, we talked about, is you'll take a piece of glass and shoot it on verticals and then use an inspection light to see how well it's laying out. And that's how you determined a lot of this.
Yeah. I take window pane glass, a 12 by 12. I sand it to a 400 grit, whatever, just to make sure there's nothing on there. And then I'd spray one flat and immediately spray one vertical. And then once they dried down, I'd put them side by side under a inspection light. Festool inspection light is what I have. And I would compare the two to see if I could tell a difference. And to me, that was the real standard. If you can get it to look like it was sprayed flat on glass, but yet it was a vertical application, then you've got something. And what I noticed is that even coatings that leveled very well, that the initial spray quality has some movement to it, some eggshell. On a vertical application, it seemed, at least to me, the better off the gun that you get, the better quality you will get once it's dry.
Absolutely.
And you may not notice that until you put it under a light, but it really is true in my experience. And that's where some of these coatings really are different. Some it seems like they've been developed to atomize better with air. But really everything I've tried seems to perform pretty well, except for one clear coat that I've had issues with. But that's where the rubber meets the road to me. If you can get it to look good on a piece of glass that was sprayed vertical, and it, in comparison to the same piece of glass sprayed flat, you've got something.
Yeah.
that's kind of what you're selling to people when you go in and you say we're gonna make your kitchen a spray booth. And I tell them that, look, I'm not rolling on a coating, and I understand that works good for people. They do it, sure. They get away with it, and I've used a fair amount of FPE products, and hey, that works good.
Yeah.
I explain, look, I'm going to give you a really good finish on the large sides of your cabinet boxes, because that's what you see the most. And they're going to look good. They're going to look like they were laid flat and sprayed. I educate them, the client, potential client, and say, this is what I shoot for, because I want to get a really, really good finish. It's not easy, but this is what we're doing. And that's why it costs more. And you can get a higher price when you educate the customer and deliver that, because they're not, 9 times out of 10 they're not going to hear that from other people, right?
Absolutely. So just give us an example, just so that some people have a place to start with this. Pick a coating that you like, and what would be your normal fluid ranges and air ranges for a particular product? And then also after that, let's talk about double orifice versus single orifice and your experience with that, because that's like a whole nother ball of wax to deal with this stuff as well.
Yeah. So yeah, every coating is different. I really like ICA, and I've tried several different products from them. The two that I like the most, one's called, they have this alphanumeric system to them. One's called AOB 818, 818. The other is called AOB 510. One is a single component, the 818, and the 510 is a 2 component, and both of them have very good spray characteristics. The 510 is finicky until you catalyze it. It'll spray okay, but as soon as you put the catalyst in it, it makes it just as good as the 818. Both of those products, though, the 510, I'll run at about 1400 fluid pressure and whatever air it takes to feather it out. I don't concern myself too much with the semantics of air pressure. It's more the appearance of the coating. And it is funny, because if you're not happy with the finish quality you're getting, I would never go down. I'd always go up.
With fluid or air? With
fluid.
Okay.
Yep, I'd always go up with fluid. I wouldn't be too concerned about the air pressure per se. Now the 818, that one there, if you're spraying things flat, use a 12 tip. It's great. Beautiful. Unbelievably good. If you're using the 510, I use an 07. Maybe an 09, no matter what, whether it's vertical or flat, because that makes a tremendous difference. For some reason, and most of these coatings I have found, they respond best to those small tips and high pressure. If it is a vertical substrate, I never use anything but an 07. Whether I'm doing the trim in a house throughout, doesn't matter. I always use an 07 for vertical application. I forget what your question was now.
No, that was it. All right. So like we were talking about double orifice versus single orifice, because some of them, they call them bubble busters. But here's the thing I want to point out is, like, sometimes depending on the coating, and you've kind of mentioned this, that they're all different. Like sometimes a double orifice makes it worse. You take it out, it goes away. Sometimes it's the reverse of that.
It is true. And one of the clear finishes that I really like is from ICA. It's called 470, AOB 470. And if you try to use a single orifice tip, which that's normally what you would use for clear coatings, you'll get bubbles like crazy. It's terrible. As soon as I go to the bubble buster tip, it's perfect. There's no bubbles at all. And it's very counterintuitive, but that works. And that's one of the things I think that maybe sometimes people have problem with air-assisted airless is the tips are very expensive, in comparison to an airless. And you go in there, you buy the machine, you ask the salesperson, what do you recommend? They recommend one size. You get that tip because you don't want to spend $100 a pop.
Right.
And you sit there and you're never able to differentiate because you get one or two tips. And it's expensive to do it, but having a tip in almost every size, it makes a difference with Waterbase because it is finicky. If you want to, you can spray Exalta vinyl sealer virtually through anything and it'll look great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Upside down, it don't matter. To a certain extent, it doesn't really matter. But Waterbase, it's funny. You can, sometimes an 08 works great and an 09 is terrible. Yeah, it's really odd how that is the case, but it is. And you just kind of have to have that option, those different tip size options at your disposal so that you can make those minute adjustments in tip size that for the product, for whatever reason, it makes a difference. But holding yourself to just a few different sizes or semantically feeling that because you were told a double atomizing tip is the best doesn't make it the best.
Right.
Because in my experience, and every coating is different, but even over different guns, over 3 different guns and 3 different manufacturers, the smaller the tip, the better. And those small tips are not double atomizing, the sizes I'm talking about. So, yes, I'm sure there is, and I know there is, because like I said, that one clear finish, oh yeah, it ain't going to work unless it is a bubble busting tip. So, fine, that's what it wants, that's what it wants. And that evidently is why that was invented for those situations. It's not just a marketing ploy per se, but it has a legitimate engineering basis for it, I can only imagine, because of its effect. I've only talked to like 2 people because it's pretty easy to determine whether someone knows their stuff or not, at least because I know it works. And you can ask a few questions that'll kind of cut to the chase. And I've only had one product rep that said, yes, this is why you should use a small tip with Waterbase with high pressure. And he explained why it works. That was the only one. And I've talked to a few, but that guy, he had his own business before he became a product rep. So I'm sure that helped him to be able to give advice.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
But I guess to me, it would be nice if those who are recommending the products, and if they also are making tip and fluid recommendations for specific equipment, if they really are honestly not being influenced by solvent-based coatings. I think that would be important too. Are you genuinely giving this advice because you've used the Waterbase and know how it works, or is this general advice based on solvent?
Yeah. Well, and here's one thing where I make the differentiation, and you did earlier, is I said, usually when someone makes those suggestions, I say, is most of what you're spraying flat or vertical? And 99% of the times they say flat. And I say, okay, that makes sense to me, because I could see how that would work, because, you know, you're shooting something flat, it has plenty of time to level out. You're not dealing with gravity. You're not doing all those things. So like for me, it's all about like, how do we get verticals to look like flats? Like that's like my push right now is like, what do we do? How do we help people out there in the field? Especially like what I've been running into a lot is inset cabinets have become popular again, and there's just no choice. I mean, if you're spraying on site, you can't lay the boxes down like they can in a factory or whatever. And I do appreciate guys, the guys from Envirolac, Stefan being actually open about this, about even, you know, a lot of these coatings are made for flat lines. So we're trying to do things that they were really never designed to do. So I think that and I think it's important for people to hear that.
Yeah, that's true. That is true too. That's a valid point, because here we are trying to make a product do what it's designed not to do, and then complaining about it.
Yeah.